not only is change on the way, but change is right now.
Hundreds of people with faith leaders and elected officials marched through West Side streets calling for peace and unity.
All over the world, they are crying with one loud voice, Black lives will matter.
These same streets witnessed to pain, frustration, violence, and looting after the police killing of George Floyd.
Take your hands off of the robot neck so that we can breathe.
The focus now is to turn that pain into purpose for a more just America, a more just Chicago. Hundreds marching toward an apartment where Dr. King once lived, highlighting the disparity in housing along racial lines, stopping along the way, bowing heads to honor George Floyd.
And I'm here standing up for my black friends and co-workers and clients who don't get the same treatment that I do, and things need to change.
A march for hope as Chicago grapples with a history of systemic oppression, inequity, and racism toward the black community.
Must report that Chicago is far from being the promised land.
Marchers here echoing King's sentiment that we must never lose infinite hope, including Reverend Jesse Jackson.
As we focus on the issue of police justice, Dr. King says housing justice, economic justice, healthcare justice. Because everybody is somebody.
Chicago is a tale of two cities, and you can see it in the disparity of education. Yes, we believe that all of God's children, regardless of their neighborhood, zip code, or race, they deserve to have a first-class education.
We believe that even though we are kids, we have voices too, and they must be heard. Now is our time.
This is literally a marathon. And it's a marathon that requires us to take up the mantle from those who came before us. There are people who have died on the cause for us to be able to be in this park today who are counting on us to keep it moving forward. That when we talk about the ancestors and what our ancestors would say, I have to remind you that you, young people, are future ancestors. You, young people, will have to answer for those ahead of us about what we did in this moment. And in this moment, you all are showing up and showing out and saying that you have had enough. That you have had enough. And that this collective, we're tired, we're exhausted. And people say, how could you be so exhausted so fast? Because you're carrying 400 years of legacies of those who got you here. You're carrying it in your DNA. And what I know about our DNA, as Kendrick Lamar would say, we got some special stuff in our DNA. You don't get to go through the things that we've gone through in this country and still get up and rise and do what we've been able to do. We still got a ways to go, but it's in our DNA to be resilient. It's in our DNA to be bold. It's in our DNA to fight. It's in our DNA to march. And what I know is that as painful, as hard, and as uncomfortable as this isn't going away with cute pictures of people hugging together. This isn't going away with things that make us feel good for the moment. This goes away when the discomfort for everybody goes away. So young people of all stripes, keep marching, keep fighting, keep being the ancestors that you will be for a future that will be much better than the present, that will be guided by those who got us here in the first place.
How can we stop this cycle of injustice? When will we be considered enough? When will we be treated normally? When will the color of our skin be an asset and not a danger? When can we feel comfortable running? When can we feel comfortable running, watching birds, playing in the park, driving, sleeping, living? It's time to change the unjust narrative of Black people in America. Our lives are important, and they have always been. We are important, and we will always be. We mattered on the slave ships. We mattered on the plantations. We mattered when we were getting lynched. We mattered when we sat on the back of the bus. We mattered and we matter today. It's time to change the wretched narrative of black people in America. We have to continue to talk about the killings happening at the hands of police and racist white people. We have to continue to talk about George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, Tamir Rice, Trayvon Martin, Sandra Bland, and countless others. Now, doing nothing won't work. This is a battle we all have to fight. Our voices are needed now more than ever. Sign petitions, go to more protests, donate, educate others, and continue to speak up about the systemic racism plaguing this country. It's time to change the unfair narrative of black people in this country. This isn't only for us, but this is for future generations to come. This is so we never have to see another hashtag. This is so we never have to watch another black man die on our TVs. This is so we're not afraid when we're pulled over. This is for every single black person in this country who is tired and fed up with the way we're treated. This is for every single black person in this country who has been victimized since 1619. This is for every single person in this country who thinks enough is enough. Change won't come if we wait for some other person or wait for some other time. We are the ones we've been waiting for. We are the change we seek. Barack Obama. Imagine the impact we would have if we stood up for what we knew was right. Imagine the impact we would have if we advocated and didn't stop the fight. Imagine the impact we would have if we worked to make things better than they are now. Imagine the impact we would have if we looked for a solution instead of just asking how. Imagine the impact we would have if we realized what we could do. The real change is inside of you.
Say I am somebody. I am somebody. Respect me, protect me, never neglect me. My mind is the pearl. I can learn anything in the world. Stop the violence, save the children. Stop the violence, save the children. Black lives matter. Black lives matter. Black lives matter. Keep hope alive. Keep hope alive. Keep hope alive. A few days ago, Congressman Bobby Rush, officers broken into and 13 police were not doing their job. Should have been fired. Because they have something called immunity clause, it's hard to fire them. When Laquan McDonald was killed 3 years ago, police who killed him was out of 400 days silent. He went to jail. First time police have been to jail for killing a black in 50 years in Chicago. It's not right. When the case of Ahmaud Arbery was killed in Brunswick, Georgia, he held back the machinery, the film for 15 days. So whenever anybody kills anybody, they must face justice. Police must live within the law. Police don't have the right to kill people without consequences.
That on the first day of January, in the year of our Lord, 1863, all persons held as slaves within any state or designated part of a state, the people whereof shall be in rebellion against the United States, shall be then, thenceforward, and forever free. And by virtue of the power and for the purpose aforesaid, I do order and declare that all persons held as slaves within said designated states and parts of states are henceforward shall be free. and that the executive government of the United States, including the military, naval authorities, therefore will recognize and maintain freedom of said persons. And I hereby enjoin upon the people so declared to be free to abstain from all violence unless in necessary self-defense. And I recommend to them that, in all cases, when allowed, they labor faithfully for reasonable wages. And upon this act, sincerely believed to be an act of justice, warranted by the Constitution, upon military necessity, I invoke the considerate judgment of mankind and the gracious favor of Almighty God. In witness whereof, I have hereunto set my hand and caused the seal of the United States to be affixed. In recognition of Juneteenth. Happy Juneteenth. Please take a moment to read a brief history and synopsis of Juneteenth and its origins. It's exceptionally important for you to know this. This has been presented by Dr. Karina Ray of the AAAS Department.
You know, Juneteenth is something that's been around since June 19th, 1865.
On that day, Major General Gordon Granger landed in Galveston, Texas. He told the people the war was over and the enslaved were free.
I am Juneteenth. That's our slogan. It means if you're not free, then I'm not free.
Now, as it was back then, the day is a celebration.
It's so cool seeing how many people celebrate this. I didn't even know it was a thing until recently.
I get goosebumps. I almost cry when I see that parade come down the street. It's just beautiful to see how it's grown.
Norman Harris has organized the last 9 Juneteenth festivals. After recent protests over the killing of George Floyd in Minneapolis, he wants this year's event to be more inclusive.
We've seen how recent events have galvanized communities to come together to fight for justice.
This is what we need. This is what we've been wanting.
But bringing people together can be tricky in the midst of a pandemic.
Trying to still make sure we're maintaining social distance in a way, it's kind of impossible at times.
For Harris, it's simply an opportunity to innovate.
And we have to continue to find solutions despite what we're going through.
Which is a lot. As they celebrate freedom, those here today know there is still more work to be done.
Juneteenth means to me progression, transition.
Juneteenth, a cross between June and 19, commemorates the official end of slavery in Texas on June 19, 1865. That's over 2 years after the Emancipation Proclamation was signed into law by President Lincoln. News of their new freedoms was slow to reach some slaves throughout the country, and historians theorize that Texan slave owners suppressed the information in order to get one final cotton harvest from the slaves. On June 19, 1865, Major General Gordon Granger and Union troops arrived in Galveston to announce the war had ended and delivered General Order No. 3, which proclaimed that all slaves were free. The first official Juneteenth celebration took place in Texas a year later and became a state holiday in 1980. Juneteenth is celebrated in many ways, ranging from parades to cookouts and other activities. But Juneteenth isn't just about celebrations. It also serves as a time to further the conversation on the legacy left by slavery in the United States, and as a means of discussing ways to address it, like the hotly contested topic of reparations.
We recognize our lineage as a generational trust, as inheritance. And the real dilemma posed by reparations is just that, a dilemma of inheritance. It is impossible to imagine America without the inheritance of slavery.
First sponsored by John Conyers in 1989 and reintroduced every session until his retirement in 2017, the Commission to Study and Develop Reparation Proposals for African Americans Act tries to tackle the subject. The bill is now sponsored by Texas Democrat Sheila Jackson Lee in the House and Senator Cory Booker in the Senate.
Though I am gratified that we are having this hearing on Juneteenth, and for those of us who understand Juneteenth, 2 years after the Emancipation Proclamation, there were those Africans who did not have freedom until 1865. H.R. 40 is in fact the response of the United States of America long overdue. Slavery is the original sin. Slavery has never received an apology.
After unarmed father Terrence Crutcher was shot and killed by police, hundreds protested here in Tulsa. What many didn't know is that nearly 100 years ago, on these very streets on which they were marching, hundreds of African Americans were killed in one of the darkest chapters of Tulsa's and America's history. A lot of folks around here used to whisper about it over the decades, but nobody, black nor white, wanted to talk about it. And that history was being forgotten. Before it happened, Tulsa was the scene of a thriving, wealthy black community. This was Black Wall Street. There were hundreds of black-owned businesses, everything from banks to pharmacies to the doctor's office. And black folks were making really good money. There were even 2 movie theaters, all black-owned and operated. Segregation was in full effect. We heard that there was a gentleman who owned a plane. Is that true?
Simon Berry was a pilot and owned his own plane.
Black folks were rich here, basically. They lived very good lives.
Many of them, yes. Yes, which caused some envy and anger among white people who commented, how dare those Negroes have a grand piano in their house and I don't have a piano in my house.
1921 rolls around. What happens?
Some type of confrontation between blacks and whites was inevitable because of the racial climate at that time, because of the presence of the Ku Klux Klan in almost every aspect of our society. But on this particular day, May 31st, 1921, a young black male named Dick Rowland, who worked as a shoe shine boy in downtown Tulsa, went into the Drexel building where he had been given permission to get water and use the restroom. There was a young white girl named Sarah Page who was an elevator operator. And Dick Rowland every day would go into the elevator with Sarah Page. On this particular day, after the elevator doors closed and Sarah Page and Dick Rowland were alone in the elevator, a few moments later there was a scream, the elevator doors opened, Dick Rowland ran and was later arrested, and Sarah Page initially claimed that she had been assaulted.
Brown says Page never pressed charges, but authorities did, and the damage was done. By the end of the day, the rumor mill said Page had been raped.
As word spread, angry whites were determined that they were going to take matters into their own hands.
A large crowd of white residents gathered at the courthouse. They demanded Dick Rowland be lynched. How did the black community respond to that demand to lynch this young man?
They were willing to risk their lives. They knew that they would be risking their lives to help defend Dick Rowland. And thousands of whites gathered in front of the courthouse. A white man approached a black man with a gun. He said, "What are you going to do with that gun?" He said, "I'm going to use it if I have to."
The 2 men argued. There was a struggle over the gun. It fired. The white resident was shot. All hell broke loose.
Blacks retreated to the Greenwood district where they set up a barrier at the railroad tracks and were able for a short time to keep whites from invading their community. But because they were so outnumbered and outgunned, whites eventually broke through the railroad tracks and invaded what was home to Black Wall Street, the Greenwood district.
This was the result. 35 city blocks of the black neighborhood burned to the ground. Historical photos show black residents shot dead in the streets. The historical account is that at least 300 people were killed.
There were children that were here that had been armed by their parents, that had been told that they could come down to Greenwood and shoot and kill an innocent person. Those are the same people that we grew up with in our communities, that were a part of our society.
How many black people lost their lives?
There's really no way of knowing exactly how many people lost their lives, potentially thousands of innocent men, women, and children.
What is worse, survivors say they remember death not just in the streets, but raining down from the sky.
Many of our race riot survivors have commented that they remembered seeing planes flying overhead, dropping bombs, dropping nitroglycerin bombs.
Mrs. Hazel Smith Jones is believed to be the last living survivor in Tulsa. She's 97 years old.
My daddy wasn't at home. Just the kids and mama. They came and got us.
Was it white people from the city?
And got us to fairground. And we was there for about 2 or 3 days.
To the fairgrounds?
And my dad didn't know where we were.
Did your family want to leave?
My mother, you know, with all this stuff going on, she thought it might have been safer with them taking us out there and being with more people.
Everyone called it a race riot. The opinion piece in the newspaper condoned it, calling Greenwood Niggertown.
Do you consider it a riot?
No, ma'am. It was really murder. It was a massacre. My grandmother was awakened at night and just told to run. Just get up and run. And they ran. She was only 9. They ran for days. She got mixed up from her family and lost in a chicken coop.
Calling it a riot was convenient for a city run by whites. There's no statute of limitations for murder, but there is for a riot. For the black victims, it was devastating.
They never received any type of justice for losing their loved ones, for losing their homes and the businesses that they worked so hard for, that they built from the ground up.
Every insurance claim from the Greenwood neighborhood was denied. The claims totaled about $2.7 million. Black Wall Street did recover, but never to its former glory.
Do you think life is better for black folks in America now?
Yeah. Some places, yes, some places not.
If there was any clearer sign that change in race relations has happened to this community, this was it. During a march for a black father slain by a police officer, half of those marching were black and the other half white, all marching in unison, saying Black Lives Matter. But there are stark reminders of the racism that continues to thrive in some people's hearts. So the marching and the worrying continues.